Hello and welcome to our session. Today I'm talking to Vanessa Coleman, the CEO from Oceanworks, which is a plastic action platform that makes it easier for brands to source recycled ocean plastics. Today we're going to be discussing how to shift towards circular value chains that solve the plastic ocean crisis while also improving the sustainability of products and packaging. So first off, Vanessa, thanks so much for joining me today in the conversation. And I think it would be great if we just started off with you telling us more about yourself and more about Oceanworks.
Thanks, Emily. So I'm really excited to be here. I come from a sustainability background and actually started my career in energy and energy technology. I went to MIT and studied environmental engineering and got an MBA there. And about 5 or 6 years ago now, I started learning about the ocean plastic crisis. And through some of my other work, I actually had the opportunity to travel to a lot of the regions where ocean plastic originates, and saw basically the increase in plastic waste that is in our environment globally. So, obviously the ocean is the end of the pipe for plastic waste that is not contained in some way. So in the US and in other developed markets, we have pretty strong trash and recycling infrastructure. So, there's a bin you can put your stuff in and it gets to a landfill where it can be contained. But in a lot of places in the world, the infrastructure is not totally in place. And so a lot of the waste ends up in the environment and the ocean is its ultimate destination. But that waste does have some value. And there's a big opportunity to pull that waste back into supply chains commercially and thus keep it out of the environment. And so that was where kind of the idea for Oceanworks started. I can't say that I was the one who had it originally. My co-founder, Rob Iannelli, actually made one of the first products out of recycled ocean plastic, a pair of sunglasses, back around that time. And we teamed up and started working on Oceanworks together.
Awesome. And I know that ocean plastic is a very broad term. So maybe you could give some more information about what those material streams look like that contribute to the ocean plastic crisis today.
Recycled ocean plastic, as we use it, and I think as it's used by companies globally, is really shorthand for plastic waste that's at high risk for polluting the ocean. So this includes the 13 million tons of waste that enter the ocean each year, the majority of which comes from the land, often in densely populated areas near the shoreline. So that specific category, that waste from densely populated areas near the shoreline, is called ocean-bound plastic. And Oceanworks is now working with a set of definitions. We have about 6 different collection zones that we categorize plastic into. And we think that's really important because we want to provide transparency and clear communications for the consumer. Because at the end of the day, the worst thing for a brand that's trying to do this work, trying to do something sustainable, is to get backlash because they haven't communicated clearly and there was a misunderstanding. So one of the things Oceanworks does is we take this broad kind of catch-all category ocean plastic and we classify it into some subcategories that help brands tell their story and talk about the importance of each of those categories in addressing the ocean plastic crisis.
Yeah, no, and I think that's really important, the piece around traceability, transparency, because these value chains are not straightforward. There's a lot of players involved. So really having an ability to be able to understand that original source provides the credibility to be able to put on a product, right? And be able to communicate to a consumer the benefit that they're achieving through those recycled sources. So I want to talk a little bit about today the applications and really kind of some of the potential of this sourcing stream for recycled plastic. So maybe we could just talk about, what you see as the potential for, and we'll use the broad term ocean plastic, for simplicity in the conversation, but what do you see as the potential for ocean plastic to fill some of the increasing demand that brands now have for recycled materials as they've started to make public commitments to source a certain amount of their packaging portfolio, their product portfolio from recycled material? How does ocean plastic kind of fit into helping meet that increasing demand?
I think it is really critical, and it's something that we've seen evolving over the last year or so as brands are trying to hit just general PCR targets. This mismanaged waste, this ocean plastic, is essentially an endless supply. Of course, it's not truly endless, but there's a lot more material out there than is being recaptured and returned to the supply chains right now. And when I say a lot, I'm talking of tens of thousands of tons of each polymer type in each region. We're talking about a lot of potential supply here. And I think one of the key things that is often misunderstood is that these streams, especially the ocean-bound waste, can be delivered with quality and capacity and consistency at a competitive cost. And so it's something that can really add to the supply. As brands think about how they're going to reach these targets, and maybe looking locally or even regionally, the materials that they think they need aren't there. And we hear that across a lot of different polymer types.
Are there specific polymer types or applications where kind of ocean plastic sources can best fill demand, or is it pretty blanket applications? Are there specific ones that you're working with brands more often to substitute materials for?
It is a range. Basically everywhere you can use recycled plastic, you can use recycled ocean plastic. So I think there is a range of polymers. We do work in rPET, we work in HDPE. We've had a lot of growth actually around polypropylene and nylon fishing net sources, which can go into more like hard goods and some higher value applications as well. So, I think there really is a range of places where you could consider recycled ocean plastic for your products.
And are there specific types of companies that are, most interested to work with Oceanworks? Where are you seeing kind of the business need? Certain industries, certain sizes of companies? Is it innovators? Is it the big brands?
Again, it's a mix. I would say that where we've had the most successful programs, it tends to be companies that know well their supply chains. So what I'm thinking there is, some brands might just buy a finished good from a manufacturer and not be really looking further down their supply chains. But brands that are thinking about where their resins are coming from and are in a position to be able to make like a direct purchase of resin that can then be consigned into their supply chains, that's where we're able to work really quickly. And I think that is a difference than working with, any old material. You don't care where it is or what it is or where it comes from. You just care that the final good has the quality you need. That is, I think, the way a lot of these supply chains have historically worked. And so there is a little bit of a shift in mindset there, to thinking about and being in a position to even directly purchase raw materials. And that
Yeah.
kind of shift in mindset can happen across sectors. We have companies making bottles that are doing that. We have companies making textiles, so bags, shoes, that are having that
Mhm.
mindset. We're working in hard goods like office chairs, those kinds of things. All of those are possible for this material stream, but it is a little bit of a different way of working with the supply chain than a lot of brands have pursued previously, particularly in this material type.
Yeah. And are there, food grade is kind of the big, challenge right now is how do you move to expand and grow kind of the supply of food grade ready recycled plastic, especially around CPG's commitments. Is there a path for ocean plastic to become kind of food grade approved, or are there other applications that are primarily you're using it for right now?
We do see some food grade materials within our ecosystem, and I would say those are definitely ocean bound, and what we call averted, so mismanaged waste that is maybe not super close to the ocean but is in the environment. Those types of material streams in areas that lack formal recycling. Um, there are some really good food grade options. I think the key is making sure that the material you have going in is, consistently food quality in the first place. And then, essentially it's just the same equipment that you would see in food grade supply chains in Europe.
Yeah.
It's the same equipment that's used globally. So right now, there is not a huge amount of ocean bound food grade, but it's definitely something that's available and can be scaled up if there is demand.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's interesting. And maybe we can talk. Okay, you started to talk a little about the supply chain, right? And that's players and brands that have visibility or control over their supply chains. Those are the ones that are making more decisions to move towards more circular supply chains. And when we think about kind of ocean plastics and the difference in channels of material, what does that supply chain look like from kind of that collection step to actually getting it to a plastic converter or a brand who's going to use it in a product or package?
So I think there's one major distinction with the material streams we work with, and that's that it's often collected and aggregated and processed in an emerging market context. So that's like the initial step. So you can think of tends to be like kind of informal collection networks flowing into aggregation sites that will buy plastic waste from the collectors, maybe have collection teams of their own. Um, Bale that together into, dedicated, HDPE or, whatever it is, polypropylene bales. And then that will be moved to typically another location where it's recycled or processed into a flake or more often a pellet form. And it's at that point where the supply chain is a little different, and that it often, in order to meet the manufacturing needs of a global brand, needs to be shipped then to another location where it'll be manufactured and assembled. And then, of course, a global supply chain, it probably will be shipped again going into retail. So
Hmm.
what we look to do is try to shorten the supply chains as much as possible. So we look for collection, aggregation, processing sites that are proximate to our customers' manufacturing locations, but that's not always possible depending on what material types they need and what sources are available. So we end up plugging in material that comes from places, typically Southeast Asia, Africa, places like that where there's a lot of mismanaged waste, um, into brands that are manufacturing globally.
And maybe you could just speak a bit more about kind of how Oceanworks fits into that. What role do you guys play within that value chain?
Yeah, we do a lot of different things for our brand partners. So, at the outset, we find and validate sources, and so we'll talk to brands about what materials they're looking for, what capacity, what quality. Maybe we have it in our network already. Maybe we need to find new sources for them. So we'll do that work, kind of like boots on the ground, and then we will provide a guarantee around the collection zone and quality. So that has to do with our material quality that as we onboard a new supplier and the resins that they supply. We'll work with them to make sure that we understand the collection zones, maybe adjust the collection a bit, work with them around the quality, make sure it's consistent, go through some test protocols, and make sure we're confident about what we are offering to the brand and that it will meet their requirements. And then the last thing that we do is we actually act as the supplier to the brand so that they can receive material at their manufacturing site rather than having to deal with themselves the logistics of getting material out of Indonesia or Vietnam, places where they might be less familiar dealing with the imports and exports and all of that. So we will bring the material to them and then work with them to tell the story of that material because we have a pretty robust track and trace platform that basically follows the material through the value chain and also provides some visuals and stories that the brands can use as they talk about the products that they've made.
And part of that kind of process, the value add is being able to find the sources because of how fragmented, I could say, some of the streams can be. So the relationship management piece, the supply chain pieces, are there additional challenges you feel like kind of you help brands overcome through this? Because a lot of the challenges that we hear around just general kind of recycling streams are transportation costs, the ability to actually be able to kind of sort and separate plastics that might be all commingled, those that might be covered in food waste, and are there additional challenges that are kind of unique to ocean plastics that you guys try to tackle and resolve for brands to make this kind of pathway more feasible?
Well, we actually try to like abstract a lot of those challenges for the brands so that what they are getting from Oceanworks is a high quality, consistent material source at a fairly competitive cost. And so, we need to understand what cost points they're buying today, what they're whether they need it to be cheaper or more expensive, or like what they can tolerate in terms of bringing in this material stream, and then also what scale they need to make it interesting for them. And that can vary widely by the brand. We have some partners that are buying, one or two containers a year. So a container is about 20 tons of material. So, it's like a regular, consistent program for them, but they're not that concerned about capacity. We have others that are looking to buy 2 to 5 containers a month. And so they need
Mhm.
to make sure if they're doing that, if they've designed in this material into their process, they need it to be consistent. So
Right.
what we've found in working with brands is that for the most part, they are able to work with the material streams that we offer, but it's critical that they're consistent. So if they're changing all the time, that messes up their process. They can't get the throughput that they need, and they need to shut their machines down and things like that. And so consistency and capacity are things that we can help address as brands think about scaling these programs with these material streams that may be outside where they typically think about sourcing.
So it sounds like there's not really a change in kind of technical requirements or manufacturing processes on the side of kind of the packaging converters and brands, or are there changes they also have to make to their process?
I would say nothing beyond what they would need to do when um, incorporating any recycled content. So that's our goal. Um, there are cases where that may be different, and then maybe they've like optimized something to a certain material stream, and what we can do is we can try to match the specs of what they've already done with the resin, or they can um maybe they've optimized it to our resin, and so then what we try to do is build out the pool of sources that they can draw from it within that same spec. So I think there is, one of the challenges in recycled plastic broadly is that the specs can vary from source to source. And so trying to like establish a consistent material stream at scale is very, very important to making this business successful.
Yeah, yeah. And I've heard too that there's some, perspectives around it's not a supply problem. There's enough waste out there that can be collected. It's a willingness to pay problem and an ability for brands to put, a premium on this to kind of fund the collection, the cleaning. What's your perspective on that? Where are we today with how much of a premium it is to kind of get access to recycled ocean plastic? Are brands really having to pay significant, amounts more? Or is it maybe not as significant as many believe? And what's the path as you think about, more infrastructure being built, these collection streams being more established? How do you see that price premium, decreasing or increasing over time?
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of forces moving in all directions on that, and it's a really important question. I think historically, recycled ocean plastic broadly was something that was at like a multiple of other material streams. But today, particularly where we're talking about high volume ocean bound streamed, we can typically deliver for within 10 to 20% of the cost of the alternative, whether they're switching from local PCR or switching from virgin plastic. Um, that is for an ocean bound stream. It certainly remains the case that if you're looking at an offshore or even a near shore or a waterway collection, those ones will be at a premium. And as a result, the market for those is relatively limited. And so what we see is if we can catch the material before it gets in the ocean. Like an
Yeah.
ounce of prevention is worth a pound of removal. And so we really do are looking at building that business quite a lot, because I think that's where it can be very competitive.
Mhm.
And I it's an interesting question where the market's going to go. I do think if there's some teeth in some of these regulations and there's a requirement that is enforced to hit a certain percentage of PCR across sectors, and I say PCR, ocean bound, and ocean being a subset of that,
Yeah.
it will put upward price pressure on PCR broadly, and it may be that it kind of maintains a separation from Virgin. It becomes its own market. But we're still seeing today is that PCR and Virgin are fairly interchangeable. Brands switch them out in and out depending on cost. And so where you're going to see the really high adoption of PCR right now is the low cost sources that can be delivered for less than virgin. And often that is the case with PCRs sourced locally, and it can be the case with ocean bound materials as well. The past couple of years, we were in a very non-favorable shipping environment globally, which did impact the delivered price of a lot of our ocean-bound material streams, but shipping prices have dropped back down, and we're now able to be fairly competitive with local PCR in a lot of geographies. And so, that's allowing us to further scale our business.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be really interesting because, like you said, there's these evolving factors. On one hand, you're hopeful that the infrastructure increases and therefore kind of the cost of acquisition increases. But then as brands increase their demand, kind of those easier to collect and sort and process streams will start to disappear. And now you're left with, waste that's harder to, acquire in a sense, right? It's harder to clean, it's dirtier, it's more commingled, and therefore the cost of extraction in a we think about kind of a virgin setting, that will inevitably go up, assuming
Yeah,
that infrastructure still stays somewhat limited, because I think we've seen that's difficult to scale, and there needs to be significant
it takes time. It takes time, and that's definitely a good point. We talk to brands about this all the time. They sample material, they're interested in it, they're interested in doing something, but they're still thinking about it. But at the end of the day, that material at that price is going to get taken by someone, and then they're going to have maybe a slightly lower quality material, maybe at slightly a higher price.
yeah.
So I think there is an advantage to brands being first movers and securing supply. And I think brands are starting to think that way. Um, I
Mhm.
think it's definitely a transition period right now. And as you're talking about, there's some scarcity of local PCRs and some resins and food grade and this and that, and people are thinking, okay, how can I like get access to this next wave of materials, and not be stuck with like the worst, hardest to source
Yeah.
types.
Yeah.
So I think that is a mindset that is starting to shift, and we do talk with brands a lot about that. Like there's this great stream here now, like take it. Someone else
Yeah.
is going to if you don't. So
Yeah, and it would be great to get your thoughts on, first, how brands need to start to think different from just a procurement standpoint. They have their suppliers, they work with them for a while, it's very clear where the sources is coming from. When they think about recycled materials, how does that kind of mindset need to change, if at all, for them to be able to kind of work effectively kind of in with these new supply chains?
I think the biggest thing to getting brands to what they want, which is a low cost, high quality, consistent material, is advanced planning. So basically, virgin plastic can kind of be bought from down the street, immediate. Oh, I need to double my production. I want it now. And then maybe it's a penny more and they can get it. And so it's a little bit of a just in time mindset, particularly in the plastic space. And what we have the opportunity to do in recycled plastics is if we can plan 3 months, 6 months, 12 months in advance, it's easy to scale a material by bringing in additional infrastructure. But you need to have a consistent offtake in order to justify that investment. And I think that's where a lot of the um, infrastructure investment opportunities break down, is
Mhm.
that even when it's like, oh, I have a lot of customers, I'm gonna scale my production, and then it shuts off because customers are switching back and forth and switching between sources. They aren't committing to a supplier or a region, and so the investments end up not working out
Mhm.
for
Mhm.
a variety of people in the space everywhere. I mean, you see so many cases of recyclers. Oh, there's like a new plant coming in. Oh, like it's shutting down, it's being sold. And I think that
Yeah.
kind of like churn makes it not a very good business. And so if you can get a consistent commitment from a brand to be moving in this direction, which I think we're starting to see with the new like targets and having that be part of what they're reporting and part of the strategy, then you can make the infrastructure investments that allow you to deliver quality material consistently at a good price. And I
Yeah.
think that's where the market will go, but it's unfortunately been a bit of a roller coaster. I mean, really, unfortunately for the recyclers that are out there doing that work, getting there, because there has definitely been a lot of um, cycles to date. And I mean, frankly, it's not like dissimilar from the carbon markets. I mean, there was a lot of great carbon offset type projects historically, but they were just up and down and no one knew what the price would be. And now it's starting to become more consistent. And so you're really starting to see progress. So I think
Yeah.
that is kind of a similar trend that we're going to see in the recycled plastics market, over the next 5 years.
For brands who, so there's the piece around kind of planning and kind of offtake agreement, partnerships from kind of an agreed demand setting. Are there other more active ways that you think brands should be kind of getting involved in building up that infrastructure, like actually investing in the infrastructure themselves? Are there other partnership models that you've seen that you feel like can kind of better unlock that consistent supply for them? And is that their role? Because I think we've seen some of the big players, actually making more direct partnerships. Not everyone can do that, but when you think about actually growing supply, what more active ways do you think companies can help to drive that?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And I was going to say just the same thing. Like you do see big brands doing it. So like directly investing in recycling capacity. Um, and then they have that supply secured for themselves and they know that there's demand because they know their business. So that type of vertical integration is happening at the big players. I do think there's a lot of brands that probably that's not like the right fit for the type of company they are. That's just not the way that they're running their business broadly with that level of vertical integration. And so for those companies, I do think just getting involved with the commitments and supply agreement type structures is a good middle ground, because they're not then directly managing the sourcing and processing of those waste streams, but they are helping grow the infrastructure because if there's consistency, um, then people can make investments. There's a lot of people out there that want to invest. It's definitely capital is available if you can show that you have a supply and a demand. Like if you have a customer and you have a waste
Yeah.
stream and I mean, the recycling economics is known. So it's easy to make that investment if you have those pieces.
Hmm.
And the supply side is actually interesting as well, because where you see some of those big brands that have made big investments in new recycling facilities, sometimes they are pulling the low-hanging fruit waste into their ecosystem. And so some of the smaller regional recyclers that we work with then are kind of struggling to
Right.
get access to waste streams that they typically had used. Now, I think that that's a good and a bad. It's good in that it's growing the overall demand within the region, but we are working closely with our partners to make sure that they're able to maintain competitive costs from a their pricing perspective, even though their waste streams are maybe a little more challenging to access than they were historically.
Yeah, so there's kind of the role of the aggregator in a sense, right? To kind of create the economy of scale for many of these more smaller regional size companies that, the big brands have. They can
Yeah.
strike up a big partnership because of the supply they're building and then get a lower cost.
Yeah.
Um, okay, so I have a few more questions. One that I was interested in getting your thoughts on are just around kind of the myths. What are some of the myths or misconceptions that companies might have around kind of ocean plastic? And maybe you could break some of those down for us.
So when companies hear ocean plastic, so often we hear the myths because a brand is like, oh, excited, they want to do something. And then they're like, oh, talk to my manufacturer. And the manufacturer, before we even get anywhere, will say one of the following: the quality is too low, the supply is inconsistent, the quality is inconsistent, or um, there's not enough. So
Mhm.
before we even get to like trying it, there's a lot of these preconceived notions about quality and capacity and consistency. And I think that is actually where, and one of the reasons that it's important to communicate about the specific collection zone. So you're going to have lower quality and maybe a little bit more inconsistent supply if you are truly pulling plastic from the ocean. It's an important part of the problem. It's going to be more expensive. It might be lower quality and it could be inconsistent, because that's a really hard problem. It's hard to do. um, However, there's a lot of waste out there that can be collected before it hits the ocean, that thus can be consistently supplied at a consistent quality. And I think that is the probably the primary myth that we need to overcome when we're working with a new partner, is just like not even wanting to try because their expectations are so low.
Mm.
Um, and we've had quite a number of customers where, they kind of got frankly bullied into trying it by somebody else. Like their customer wanted them to try it, or their boss wanted them to try it. They're in engineering and they thought it was a waste of time. Anyway, they got pushed into doing it and they did it. And then we got feedback that it worked great. And like we get this email that's like, hey, we ran your material and it actually like worked great in our mold. We were shocked. Like we get the we were shocked a lot. And then comes the question, can you continue to supply this quality and can it be consistent? And at the end of the day, some of those questions, as we think about it internally, they're not true questions, they're justifications for not taking action. um,
Mhm. Mhm.
it's like it's the risk of doing something new and having a problem. And so if they don't change anything, then they don't have any problem. They can just keep doing what they're doing and their job is easier. So there has to be a forcing function to even take that risk, whether or not the problem is real, they're going to talk about it. And
Yeah.
so we just think about it that way. We answer the questions, and there's not to say that there isn't a lot of frustration on our team internally about people who ask questions to justify not doing things. And we can see that pattern happening. And I'm hopeful that, as there begins to be broader adoption. And as some of these companies really start to take seriously their commitments around recycled content percentages, the hypothetical what if there's not enough, what if it's inconsistent, stop getting in the way of moving a project forward, because we are able to supply quality consistent material at high capacity for ocean bound and PCR feedstocks. Like, you're not going to necessarily see that from the deep ocean. And so that's why we think it's important to like distinguish those stories too. If someone's making a product from deep ocean plastic, they should be like celebrated for that,
Yeah,
because it's going to be premium. But if someone's making a product from ocean bound plastic, they should also be celebrated for that, because they have to do something new and it's helping prevent more plastic from going in the ocean. And so as long as the story is told accurately, we want to celebrate like the successes at all levels. And hopefully like the increased awareness of that will start to overcome some of these myths and, you know, false barriers that people throw up, you know, just because it's risky to do something new. And it's hard. So it's not the path of least resistance. So we try to make it as easy as possible, but it's still new. So
yeah.
we get that.
Well, no, and it's exciting to see brands starting to, incorporate the materials into their products and then using those as case studies, which hopefully also encourage other companies which maybe, don't have the budget to take bigger risks or try kind of new business models to be able to shift towards that because they see the use
Yeah.
case being proven.
Yeah.
And I think,
Exactly.
certainly around kind of the commitments and the scrutiny that many companies now face around kind of plastic pollution. Hopefully that helps to start to accelerate, some of these models so that not only are they adopted more, but then they're also the scale at which they are used is at a greater extent, and therefore, they're more economical for everyone, and there's easier ways to be able to provide traceability.
Yeah.
So,
And that's actually a great bridge to why we emphasize traceability, is
mhm.
that, you know, if a brand is trying to do something new and it's a risk, they don't they don't want to have backlash for that, because they didn't tell the story right. And that has happened multiple times in this space. And frankly, I hate to see it. Maybe they didn't tell it perfect. Maybe they didn't communicate as effectively as they could have, but they were trying. And I think it's important that people take the first step. I also think it's important that they have the tools to communicate clearly. And so we try to be a partner that offers that, that offers guidance around how you talk about ocean bound material, that ensures that you don't accidentally put out copy that said you pulled waste from the ocean if you did not do that. Because that happens a lot. I mean, the supply team, the executive team may know exactly where the materials coming from and they may know the story, and then the marketing team puts out something that sounds good that says the waste was pulled from the ocean, totally not meaning to, you know,
Yeah,
create this
yeah.
issue. But so, you know, we try to be that kind of a resource for our partners,
Mhm.
and make sure that they can communicate clearly and transparently and confidently share their claims about the impact that they're making through their work.
Yeah, no, it's very important. And then they receive the recognition for that, right? Which is where, additional value comes from making the investment or paying the premium for that.
Yeah, and I mean, the Holy Grail is hopefully it's not much of a premium, and it's
Yeah,
a quality material that brands can work with and they can tell a great story. So it should be an easy yes, and that's what we're working towards. So we're getting there. We're definitely getting there with a lot of our programs. And, um, you know, I think, again, back to like being able to plan and make long-term commitments and things like that, that helps us deliver great programs for our partners. And so that's where a lot of our most successful programs are, is when we have that kind of foundation in place. They're thinking about their raw materials. They are in the position to make direct purchases of raw materials if needed, and they're planning on the, you know, multi-year time scale. Then we
mhm.
can deliver a kick-ass program. So, you know, I think it is there for the taking. You know, it's just a lot of pieces that have to fall into place.
Yeah, yeah. Excellent. Well, it's great to kind of hear more about the work you guys are doing. Really appreciate the conversation, Vanessa. Yeah, and I look forward to kind of seeing what Oceanworks does over the next year.
Thank you so much, Emily. It was a pleasure to be here. And yeah, love to connect with anyone who wants to learn more about Oceanworks after the piece. We're at oceanworks.co, and I'm Vanessa at Oceanworks.